The time now is 3:07 on Wednesday, March 27, 2024. I would like to start with the study session, 3 o'clock. So meeting call to orders. Madam Clerk, would you please take the roll call?
Mayor Nguyen,
I'm here.
Vice Mayor Ho, Councilwoman Fan West,
Yes, I'm here.
Councilmember Bonzo,
Here.
Councilmember Nguyen.
I'm here.
Mayor, you have a quorum with Vice Mayor Ho absent.
All right, thank you very much. And salute to the flag, supposed to be Vice Mayor Ho, and she's not here. Can I ask Councilmember Menzo to do it, please?
Please stand. Ready? Begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Thank you. Please be seated. Next is oral communication for the study session. So, Madam Clerk, do we have anybody sign up for this? Okay. Then we go right into the presentation and discussion of the Housing Accountability Act, Housing Crisis Act, Density Bonus Law, AB 2097, and other state laws as they related to the restrictions on the cities in processing housing projects. So stop, report, please.
If I could just briefly introduce, this is, I have Scott Porter from my office here, who is one of our experts on housing issues. And so I wanted to give this update to the council because we do have projects that are coming forward soon. And it's really important because the state has enacted a number of laws and that impacts how we process these applications and how much discretion the council will have. And so I just want to make sure that the council has a clear understanding of what those laws are. So give you a chance to ask questions if you have any. They can be kind of confusing, but Scott here is here to try and give you a little overview.
All right, thank you, City Attorney. Thank you, Scott, for being here. So you may start it.
Very good. It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me. So as City Attorney Bettenhausen just mentioned, California has enacted a number of laws relating to housing in recent years, and the general thrust of those laws have been to reduce the authority of cities to regulate housing in particular, and in essence, quite often we're limited in what we can and cannot do with respect to housing. So what I'm hoping to cover are these laws. There, in the last cycle, I believe there were 50-some different bills. I'm just summarizing some of the recent bills from the last, we'll say, 3, 4, 5 years. We'll talk about the density bonus law. We'll talk about processes. So some of the regulations relate to housing laws, so the Housing Accountability Act, SB 35. And then we'll talk about the limits on zoning authority. So that we'll talk about various government code sections 66300, AB 2097 relating to parking, AB 2011 and SB 6 relating to housing and commercial zones, laws relating to accessory dwelling units, SB 9. Essentially, there are a lot of bills, and as I talk about each one of these areas of the law, feel free to ask questions, interrupt, and I'm more than happy to answer whatever questions may arise. And if I don't know the answer, I will get back to you with a more thorough answer, and it may be that there might be something that would not be appropriate for me to discuss publicly. So certainly that is something that I can speak with you about offline, or I might be able to send a memo if that's something of general interest to the City Council. So the first thing that I'll be covering would be the density bonus law. So to understand the density bonus law, you first need to understand terms that I'm going to be using. One of the terms that is very important to understand is that we talk about low-income housing, very low, and moderate income housing. There are other categories, but these are the main categories: very low, low, and moderate. So what is affordable to somebody of very low income is, the median income is 100%, right? So somebody of low income, that means a particular rent would be affordable to somebody who makes no more than 80% of the median income. So what that means, so a median income, if there's one person in the household, then that would be $80,000. If there's 2 people in the household, that's $91,000. So that means the rent would need to be affordable to somebody that makes $91,000 collectively in their entire family. So husband plus wife and kids and whatever, the total income from the whole unit is $91,000. So what does that translate to as far as actual rent? You can see down here in the green, here's an example. If it is affordable to somebody of a very low income, in which case that's 50 percentile, they make half of what the median income is, then if there are 2 people living in that household, that means they'd be paying a monthly rent of $1,400 and change. So I'm going to be talking about the low, very low, and moderate income many times today. So the density bonus law, here's the quick summary. If you build a project that has a certain number of affordable units, very low, low, or moderate income units, then you will qualify for 4 different benefits. Number 1, you get a density bonus. In other words, you get to build more units than you would otherwise get to build. Number 2, you get waivers. You can say, city, those rules don't apply to me. Number 3 is you can get concessions or incentives, which the term concessions or incentives mean the exact same thing. So a concession is the same thing as an incentive. And it's another way of saying, no, we don't want those rules to apply to us. And the 4th thing is reduced parking requirements. So if they build a senior project, for example, then they would be able to get each one of these benefits, and the city could not legally deny those extra benefits. So specifically, let's talk about the bonus, the amount of density that you get. So to qualify for a density bonus, to be able to get all of these things, you need to meet the requirements of one of these categories, either 10% low, 5% very low, it needs to be or 100% senior citizen housing development, or 10% moderate, which is only for, and you're allowed to sell, those would need to be for sale. 10% very low, or for foster youth, disabled veterans, homeless persons, 20% lower income students in student housing development projects, or a project which is 100% affordable. And if it's 100% affordable, at minimum 80% would need to be low and 20% would need to be moderate. So G is, that's, if you get that, then you get even more bonuses than you would otherwise get. You cannot get a density bonus if it's affordable rental, if there were affordable rental units that existed in the last 5 years and that are not replaced. So the density bonus, how much density do you get? Here are some examples of numbers. If 5% of your proposed units meet the density bonus, then you would get a 20% on density. So if, for example, if you could build normally 100 units, but 5% of those 100 units are for very low, then your total number of units actually goes from 100 to 120. So you get an extra 20 units beyond, you get an extra 20% more than you would have otherwise been able to obtain. Here are some other numbers. If you build a senior housing project, you would get 20% density, and then different numbers depending on the type of project. Additionally, if you build the 100% affordable project, then the default is you get an 80% density bonus, not 50%, you get 80%. Additionally, it's possible you would even be able to get a higher density than that. If it's within half a mile of a major transit stop, then there is no limit on density. Also, if it's in a very low vehicle travel area, then there's no limit on density. And that essentially means a part of town where below 85% of the vehicle miles traveled per capita, or the city vehicle miles traveled per capita. In other words, a place where not as many people drive cars. Here are the numbers for super density bonus. If you meet those requirements, in addition to those other numbers, then you can get even more bonuses. I'm throwing a lot of numbers at you, but this is just so you can see the substantial amount of benefit that you can get if you build a project. And I recognize there's a lot of information in these slides. I'm not going to hit all this information. This is much more intended to be as a resource to you, so that you have a general, something to come back to if you want to look it up in more detail. And certainly, as I indicated, I'm happy to discuss.
And Scott, can you just briefly mention why that might be of concern to, let's say, nearby residents, these higher densities like that?
So the state is, the thought with the state is well, we want more housing. We have a housing crisis declared by the state. So quite often what ends up happening is members of the public will come to the city council and say, we don't like this project for whatever reason, but the city cannot deny the density bonus if they meet those requirements. So that's an unfortunate side effect from your perspective, but sometimes we have to be the arbiter of bad news. So there are instances, if they don't meet all the legal requirements, then they wouldn't be able to get the density bonus. But that's just how it is, unfortunately.
I have a quick question.
Yes.
Is our staff, you mentioned that what's allowed prior to the density bonus. So is our staff looking into a particular project that comes before planning, that we look at, okay, what is allowed prior to the density bonus? And to calculate
Correct.
to calculate how much is the max that they would be allowed, how much density they would be allowed. I mean, how are we, I'm making sure that we have the formula and really look into that?
I think the question is, when planning reviews a proposed development project, do we look at density bonus? Yes, we do. And we follow the state's formula as highlighted by Scott.
So the state has a formula of what is allowed in a particular zone prior to the density that's going to be allowed. What's allowed prior to the density, and then to calculate how much density is going to be allowed on top of that.
That is correct.
So for example, if you have a project, so the step number one is what is the amount of density that the city allows on a particular project? So the city made that determination whenever you did the general plan and the zoning. That's step number one. How much density is allowed? Let's say hypothetically 20 units. Then the developer would say, oh, well, I would be able to get 20, but I'll provide 10% very low. Therefore, I get a density bonus above that. Not do I get 20, now I get 27. So that's what the city staff will be doing, and they'll run it past our office if there are any questions. But essentially, you can make a spreadsheet, which I have. I type in the numbers, boom, there's your number. That's how many units you get, automatic.
Okay. Thank you.
Another question.
Yes.
Well, this isn't new. Are you just updating us on California law that, I know it's more relaxed, it's more lax than before, but it's not new, right? Because the
So-
density bonus.
Correct.
has
The
been-
density bonus law has been evolving for as long as I've been practicing law,
Mm-hmm.
and I can't believe how many years it's been since I started. So more than 20 years, the density bonus law has been evolving. Every few years, it becomes more and more robust.
Is this the latest update?
This is the latest.
Since when?
The density bonus law was updated maybe 2 years ago with the super density bonus? Okay.
So the super density bonus, that must be new, right?
So that's new.
That's
So
new.
I mentioned it very quickly. Here are some examples of the super density bonus. So if you do over and above, essentially, if you qualify for 2 density bonuses, is really what this is getting at. Not only do you meet all of this density, but you've decided to do the density bonus a second time, then you can get additional bonuses, and that's what this super density bonus is.
This is really super wonderful, because I've seen, I mean, I know, I've kind of worked with this formula, and I've not seen anything, 100% like this. It's like 100% affordable for super density bonus, right? And that's really good.
So it is
for
possible
builders.
to get very high density bonuses, particularly if it's in if you're near mass transit and you build 100% affordable. If you add those two together, the amount of density that you can get is almost double.
Okay, unheard of. Thank you.
I know
Well,
cities limit.
Sorry,
oh,
I should correct what I'm saying. My apologies. There is no limit on density, but I'm saying from a practical perspective, at some point, it just doesn't, the math doesn't work anymore. Like from an affordability perspective, the developer they'll do their calculations.
Yeah.
And they say it doesn't make any more sense for us to build any more units.
Question, so I know we're handcuffed by the state, but can this city dictate how much the low income level that the developer must build?
So what qualifies as low income, those are all set by the state. The developer will then come to the city and they will say, I wish to build 2 very low and 3 low income. We can't tell them, oh, no, sorry, we're full on low income, you can't propose that. We're not allowed to do that. They come to us with a project and then we have to decide, or actually we don't decide, we do the math. How many extra units do you get if you propose that?
What if a developer wants to say, I only want to build moderate? Can the city say, no, you need to build so much extreme and so much very?
Okay, so a city can have what is called an inclusionary zoning ordinance. Maybe you can speak more specifically about what our standards are in that regard.
Councilmember Monzo, the inclusionary zoning ordinance is where the city will set a standard for example, for developments meeting a threshold, let's say 20 units, the developer shall provide X percentage of low or very low income. That's where we set the mandate. The city currently does not have an inclusionary housing ordinance.
I think it's something that we make sure we need to get on that, because if a developer most likely is not going to want it, they want the max amount of bang for their buck. So I think they're going to, if they can just get away doing the bare minimum to get an X amount of density, but we're a city where we don't have enough very low housing, for an example, we should be able to say, hey, well, you need to build an X number of very low or numbers, and chances are they're not going to want to do that. But I think if we need to make sure that we have some say for us to get a certain amount of very low or even extremely low. But that's something that we can do as a
So
city.
it is lawful for a city to have an inclusionary zoning ordinance, and we can say, for example, for every housing project of more than, say, 5 units, you need to provide, well, it wouldn't be 5 units, but over whatever the specified threshold is, 10 units or larger, then you need to provide X number, you need to have 10% of your units need to be affordable. We could do that.
And that's
If you go
inclusion-
beyond 15%, then the state will ask for more information. You can't just automatically say, hypothetically, you need to have 100% affordable, the state will say, no, that's illegal. And so you can't go above 15% unless you have a study, because the concern is that actually ends up stopping housing.
Yeah, but there has to be
Right.
there has to be a kind of like a medium that
Right.
where it's still beneficial for the developer, but it's also beneficial to the community that we have a certain amount of, very low, for example, very low housing. And that's exclusionary, we call that?
Inclusionary housing ordinance.
Inclusionary.
Scott, if I can clarify also the comment on mass transit. One of the challenges when it comes to Orange County folks reading it and interpreting it is the fact that it doesn't have to do with the number of people on the bus. It has to do with the service that's provided by the transit service. So in LA, for example, let's just say there's the LA DOT Dash, there's an MTA shuttle, there are other lines, and a lot of the times they're full, and people wait 2 or 3 buses before they get on a bus, right? So it's easy for those communities, when you talk about mass transit, for them to see it and accept it. In Orange County, the buses aren't exactly full, but a lot of the times they're run very frequently. So that triggers that. And that's hard for folks, particularly in our communities, to understand why is that metric applicable. It is applicable to a lot of parts of the state. It's not really applicable logically in Orange County. So there is always that pushback.
I was just wondering, I'll just be really quick, because it says here two mass transits lines. Do we even have that? Do we have 2?
We have when we did,
Let's say on Westminster Boulevard.
so on Westminster Boulevard, for example, OCTA changes the way that they run their bus lines, and we are working with them to figure out and be more in tune with when they do change the way that they run their bus lines. When we brought SB 748, right? The VMT study during COVID, when we brought that to the council, We provided a map of where high transit-rich corridors existed in the city, and believe it or not, it was almost every major corridor in the city qualified under that metric. Recently, on a particular project, we dug really deep into Westminster Boulevard and how it actually operates on Westminster Boulevard. We were surprised to find that it no longer meets the metric throughout the entire city, because OCTA runs their buses differently along Westminster Boulevard between a certain segment of the city, different than the other segment. So it's constantly changing. One would think that we are not going to meet the mass transit requirement in the city, but on the contrary, most of our corridors meet the mass transit requirement, which is, again, it's contradictory to what people observe, because you see OCTA buses, the shelters are relatively empty, the buses are not completely full like you would see in San Francisco, San Diego, or downtown LA. So,
Thank you.
I think that, I appreciate that the council have a lot of questions on this, and that's what we have the study session for. But I believe that you still have more on your presentation to go.
Right. I have a substantial amount of material, but I am happy to answer whatever questions may arise, because
I see the package right here, and then you have the presentation. You want to go through
I'm
that, or you want to just pick out some and go through that, or what? I'll just open for the
I serve at the
questions.
pleasure of the council. I'm getting a "let's keep going" sign. So,
Yes,
all right, we'll
please.
keep going.
Yes, please.
Okay.
That's what I'm geared at.
Very good. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is, what ability do you have to deny a project? I say that because, well, if you want to approve the project, you're not going to have a challenge. You're not going to have a legal challenge, except for maybe people opposed to the project. But so from a legal perspective, the challenges come in if you decide you want to deny a project. As a general rule, it's very difficult to deny a project. It can be done, but you are limited in your ability to do so. So here's the rule. So it says, not a project, a concession or an incentive. So a concession or incentive, that's saying, I want to do something extra. Like, I don't want that rule to apply to me. I want this thing. So here's the rule. For you, so what is a concession or incentive? It's a reduction in the city's site development standards or a modification of zoning code requirements or architectural design requirements that essentially, and then goes on to say, in other words, you still need to meet the building code. You can't build an unsafe building. Or a reduction in the setback and square footage requirements, or a reduction in vehicle parking spaces that would otherwise be required. Okay, so they get a reduction in development standards. What are development standards? Here's the definition of development standards. It's all these things. So if somebody wants a reduction of the city's height requirements, setback requirements, floor area ratio, open space requirements, minimum lot area, parking ratio, these are all things that a developer, if they qualify for a density bonus, may be able to say, oh, well, I provided these units, that rule doesn't apply to me, or it's going to be reduced to some extent. So we're required to, other examples might be if something is zoned for housing, they might be able to add in commercial to the housing project. Well, that's the opposite of what most developers want. They want to take commercial and turn it into housing. So this probably won't come up. So when can we deny that request? Limited circumstances. We can do it. It says, so number one is, if the concession or incentive does not result in identifiable and actual cost reductions consistent with this requirement. So if there is evidence in the record that shows, and it's reputable evidence, and it's not just, I think this, well, you need to actually have a basis for that conclusion. If we can say, no, that won't actually save the developer any money, as a matter of fact, it'll do the opposite, it'll make it more expensive, then that doesn't qualify. Okay, but it's the burden of the city to prove it rather than the developer. The developer can just say, it'll save us money, and that's good enough unless we have evidence to the contrary. Additionally, if we make a written finding that there is a specific adverse impact as defined in this code section, and there's no feasible method to mitigate that impact. So now, what is a specific adverse impact? A specific adverse impact means an objective, written, public health or safety standards as they existed on the date the application was deemed complete. So we cannot deny a project because I don't like the paint color. Unless we have a rule that says paint, and this rule is already written down, and it says paint color must be white, then we can require it being white. But if that is not written down in advance, we cannot say, sorry, that's ugly, I don't like the color that you're proposing. Now, that said, we can have design requirements, but again, those need to be objective. So those would be things like, we can require an awning to be a certain size, or it can be no longer than 2 feet long, or your windows need to be at least 2 feet wide, or 2 feet, but it needs to be written down in advance. We can't make up the rules as we go along. That's the basic idea. So how many concessions do you get? The more you do, the more concessions you get. So the more incentive, the more density, et cetera. A waiver. You can get an infinite number of waivers. What is a waiver? A waiver is, so this is because in no case may a city, county, create a development standard that will have the effect of physically precluding the construction of a development that meets these requirements. So if our rules would stop the development full stop from happening, well, they want to build 20 units, and we have rules that would prevent them from building the 20 units, even though our code allows 20 units. If those rules are going to stop that, then we have to allow that to occur. Now, there must be some limit to that, right? And right now, the courts have not yet imposed a limit. I have no doubt that there is some limit to this. But the cases that I am aware of have granted the waivers that said that the city is not allowed to deny that particular waiver because they built. So here's a quote from the relevant court case. A city may not apply any development standard that would physically preclude the construction of that project as designed, even if the building includes amenities beyond the bare minimum of building components. So if, for example, they want to reduce the city's open space requirements, the city can't say, well, we could redesign the project for you in such a way that you wouldn't, we can shrink your project to make it have less open space and you'd comply. Well, this says that the project as designed, we cannot change the project. If they're saying that's how it needs to be, that's how it needs to be. Now, there has to be a limit to that. I'm not sure that we want to be the first city to have a legal fight to find out what the limit is. There's going to be one. But if we deny a waiver, then we're inviting a legal risk, legal challenge. The question is, would we win in court? And we'll find out. So again, how may the city deny a waiver? It's the same basic idea. If there's a specific adverse impact, if there are objective identified written public health safety standards or policies that existed when the application was submitted. Recall that, so they can get concessions, they can get waivers, they can also get they get a density bonus, also they get reduced parking standards. And this is even if they don't ask for a concession. So in general, P1, in general, these parking standards apply. If for each 1-bedroom unit, they only are required to provide 1 parking space. 2 to 3 bedrooms, 1.5 parking spaces. 4+ bedrooms, 2.5 parking spaces. So automatically, the city is going to not be able to require as much parking for these projects as we would otherwise require.
I have a question.
Yes.
So regarding, I see the limit in parking there because I know at least 1 bedroom or 2, there's always 2 cars. You know what I mean? So that will decrease the parking, but I know we can't do much with the state of California. But what is 1.5? I mean, half is what, like a motorcycle parking?
So that's on a collective basis. So for example, if you had 10 2-bedrooms, then 10 times 1.5 is, so it'd be multiplied by the number of units. So 1.5 per unit, so you have 10 units.
Gotcha.
So 15 parking spaces for those 10 units.
Gotcha, okay. Thanks for clarifying that.
There are additional reductions if they do even more. So P2 and P3 saying in some instances, You might be able to reduce to half a parking space if it meets these requirements, and if one of them being that it's within half a mile to a major transit stop. And P3 says you can get zero, there's no required parking if it's a 100% affordable project and it meets one of these requirements. For example, if it's a senior project with paratransit service, then they're not even required to provide any parking.
So in that case, where are they going to park their car? On the street, or they go into somebody's house and park in front of their house, or what?
Wherever there's parking available. So it'd be street parking, it would be maybe no parking.
You know, I understand, like San Francisco or LA, that would make sense for that model. But in Orange County here, we have a lot of single homes. And by doing this, it's gonna reduce the quality of life in Orange County here. And I know that Orange County cities, when I talk to my other colleagues, they're not really happy, like Newport Beach, you know, to Huntington Beach, to Costa Mesa, you know. So, I mean, are there a way that we can, as a city, kind of delay a little bit of
So
these
there
developments?
are some things, and I actually did point out the very last asterisk there. So exception number 2 and 3 at the bottom of the slide here, it says if the city in the last 7 years has completed a study, and that study essentially says, no, we actually do need parking in this area, then you can't get these super reduced amounts within P2 and P3. So for example, you couldn't get a 100%, you couldn't get a project with no parking. You couldn't get a project with half a parking space. But they would still get the reduced amount of parking no matter what, of the 1 or the 1.5 or the 2 that's listed in P1. So that's one thing that could be done.
That lead to my next question is that, so it is state law, but do we still have the right to, the city have the right to come out with the exception? Could we, it is a state law that we have to abide, but the city, do we have the right to come out with the ordinance or different than that, based on the exception that you're talking about?
So if we would be sued if we did not apply these requirements.
Okay,
And
then what is the exception means? The
So-
exception, you said that we don't have to follow the P2 and P3, right?
Correct. So P2 and P3, so the P2 and P3, that's within the code itself, 65915 point, subsection P2 and P3. So the general rule is, these are the parking requirements that are listed in P1. So if we have that study that says we don't need sufficient parking, then the requirements of P1 will apply, but not 2 and not 3. So yes, it will be reduced, but it won't be reduced as much, is my point.
Yeah, the reality too with that is that I worked as a consultant in the traffic engineering industry for 8 years before I came to the city, and I worked all over the Western United States. I can't think of a single client that I had that had this type of study identified and adopted. So, and to clarify, it says within the last. So it was an opportunity to have had one essentially done. It doesn't say
Correct.
you can do one now.
No, it's like if you
Is that the way I'm
had it
reading
done.
I believe you could do it now,
Okay,
and then it would last for 7 years.
for 7 years. So I've never seen a scope of work for that type of a study, citywide study. I can't think of a single city in the county that has that, but we could definitely
We could
explore
look into
that.
it,
We could look
but
into it.
I'm skeptical that it would make the determination that we really desperately need the parking. My guess is that it would not reach that conclusion.
Mr. Mayor, I have a question.
Please.
Okay, so since we understand inflation's, the rise in products and material, the price it has increased. We understand that, and also getting those material is really hard. So is that a way for us to justify in a way of slowing that process of approval? Because, that's the fact. It's hard for us to get the material than before inflation, right? And then also the price has increased since then. With that in mind, I mean, I believe the state would understand, right? So, I mean, I guess what I'm trying to say, is there a deadline from the state that requires our city, the city of Westminster, to do high density at a certain time? Understanding, factoring in inflation, the price of material, and also, you know, it's hard to get the material to the city.
So the city is required to process developments as they come in. So if it's proposed by an applicant, then we need to make the determination of whether it complies with the housing density bonus laws. And if it does, then we need to apply those laws. And if it does not, then we can deny it on that basis.
Okay.
I'm not sure I answered your question.
If it doesn't pencil out for the developer, that's their burden.
Right.
That's not a reason for.
I do
Correct,
see the
right.
reason is public health, safety standards, policies, and condition that exists for the applicant's application. So I understand those are the requirement that we can deny.
Right, so so the question is, when they applied to the city, what were the rules that the city had at that time? Those are the rules that we're going to apply now. If they met all of those requirements, then we would approve the project. If it did not, then we would deny the project.
Okay.
I think contrary to what you were thinking, if I may add, if I may answer, is that developers would want to have more rather than less units.
Yeah.
Because less units would usually not pencil out, and more units would. So, if that helps.
I think that's fair, that as a general rule, density is in favor of the developer.
Yeah.
Certain number of units, you can make
So
more
they
money
want
per
that.
square foot. Yep.
But, yeah, thank you.
But I guess my question is more of the state legislature.
So the legislation does not indicate, it doesn't have any exceptions based on cost. I think it's just more of an economics thing. And the reality is, what will a developer propose? And that will be a real limitation. If the interest rates change, then a project that used to be affordable doesn't work anymore. It doesn't pencil anymore. As a matter of
Right.
fact, I had that conversation this morning.
Yeah, but that's the developer's decision, not ours. It
Correct.
has nothing to do with the city.
Well,
It's just their
also
thing.
the
Yeah.
housing, I mean, I understand there's requirement for us to do high density. I mean, with the city of Westminster, what is the timeline for them, for us to finish the high density in our city? Are there a requirement?
It's
So-
already going on now. We're just getting an update on the
I
newest.
mean, are
So
there
the-
a deadline?
So there's separate issues related to our housing element. You know, that's a separate issue. We have an approved housing element, which was approved by the state, which required that we have higher density. So that's kind of in place, it's been approved, and it's not for us to develop those now. It's up for the developers then to take advantage of those opportunities and come and build a project. And they may come and it says that they could build 30 units per acre there, but then they get a density bonus on top of that under what he's talking about and get even more. So we've done our job as far as the housing element, on the city side. Now it's up to the developers to propose projects.
Yeah, we don't, on the housing element, we just need to show that there's the ability to build a certain amount of each level of housing. Our city is not required to build it. We're not developers.
Correct.
I think that we can come back to this. I know that you have a Housing Accountability Act that you have to go through, and also the next one is what, the ADUs, which is the government code 66300.
Yeah, so
Why don't you
I'll go ahead and
into that? Yep.
I'll try to move things along here.
Thank you.
I recognize that you have a meeting at 5, so that's a hard stop there.
Yep, 445.
4:45, okay. So one last thing to be aware of in the density bonus, if a court finds that, this is a quote, if a court finds the refusal to grant a requested density bonus, incentive, or concession is a violation of the section, the court shall award the plaintiff's reasonable attorney's fees and costs of suit. The court must issue, so if we lose and we deny when we should have, not only have you paid our law firm to represent the city, you're paying their law firm to sue and beat the city. So that can be potentially very expensive. Here's one example. If you get a density bonus, in this example, Let's assume that the zoning is a maximum of 20 units per acre. The acre is one lot, so that means 20 units, so you get 20 units. The applicant initially proposes 18 market rate units, and then 2 are affordable to very low. So all are 1 bedroom. Okay, so that means this is a 10% affordable project, affordable to very low. Thus, they get a 32% density bonus. And then this increases, so that rounds up to be 26.5 units. Well, that rounds up to 27 units. So that means they're going to get a total of 27 units. So for building 2 of the units, they're going to get an extra 7 units.
Wow.
The waivers would be unlimited. The incentives and concessions, they would get 2. And the required parking would be 1 parking space per unit. So as you can see from this example, you can have this is a substantial benefit to developers, and it's an incentive to build more housing. Okay. So, Government Code 65589.5, the Housing Accountability Act. Here's the quick overview. Cities are required to approve specific housing projects, timelines must be met, or the project is deemed compliant. There's a no net loss rule. It says that cities cannot reduce the intensity of land unless essentially we upzone somewhere else. If you downzone here, you have to upzone somewhere else. So you cannot reduce the amount of housing that the city is going to be churning out. There's a 5-hearing maximum. So if a project goes to the Planning Commission for 1 meeting, and then they continue it and say, we'll talk about it next meeting, that's 2 meetings, and then they don't make a decision until the next meeting, that's 3 meetings. Now it comes to you, it's been appealed to you, the city council. You have 2 meetings left to make a decision. If you don't approve it, it's deemed approved. So continuing a project, delaying, can ultimately be a benefit to the developer. Usually developers don't want delay, but this is one of those instances where they might actually want a delay. So it's in the city's best interest to actually make a decision, one way or the other. Just make it quickly. That's usually what a developer wants. So approval of projects within 60 to 90 days of an EIR being completed for 50% affordable projects. A city cannot force a reduction in housing density. It locks standards in place for affordable projects. So the moment that they have a complete application, then those are the rules that apply. Except there's an automatic fee increases. They can require compliance with updated health and safety requirements. You still have to build a safe building. If California updates those rules, you have to build a safe building. Okay. Portions of it apply to all housing and not just affordable, and there are specified special findings that need to be made if you're going to deny a project. So if it's looking like a denial is imminent, you need to have us write a perfect resolution that has the exact correct denial findings. So denials. The city cannot deny a housing development project without making certain findings. So if it's an affordable project, then all of these special findings, then one of those findings needs to be made. Essentially, it's really, either the city has an approved housing element and has met the RENA allocation, or the project will have a specific adverse impact. We've heard that language before. In other words, they didn't meet our specific requirements. It's legally required for us to deny. That will be very rare. It's on land zoned agricultural or there's inadequate water or sewer, very rare for that to occur. Or it's inconsistent with the general plan and the zoning. But if it's consistent with the general plan and not the zoning or one way or the other, then they may be able to proceed anyway. And then there's different findings if it's a market rate project. Essentially, it's hard to deny housing projects. That's the short version of it. I will just skip through the important things. Essentially now, the Department of Housing and Community Development, HCD, they have increased authority to sue cities that are not in compliance with these rules. They can refer things to the Attorney General. Applicants can get attorney's fees. There's substantial penalties if the city ends up violating housing laws. SB 35, which is Government Code 65913.4. This is a streamlined objective review process. The good news is, on SB 35, is we are one of the very few cities in the state of California that is not currently subject to the streamlined SB 35 process because we have met our We're up to date as far as our housing that we have provided in this cycle. I believe there are only 42 cities in all of California that have met, and we are one of them. So if we ever do not hit those numbers, and based on those numbers, I think at some point we will not be in compliance, and SB 35 will apply to us at some point. So if it's a qualified affordable project, then then special things will kick in. One of the major things to qualify for SB 35 is the developer has to pay prevailing wages. In other words, they have to pay the same wages that you'd be paying to union members. That increases the price of the project roughly 25%. So that ends up making a lot of projects not pencil out that otherwise would pencil. So a lot of developers could say, you know what, I don't want to use this super fast process. I'll just use the slow process so I don't have to pay as much money.
That's SB 35, you said?
SB 35. So if this applies, the city must, but maybe you're like, you know what, I just want to get this thing done, chop, chop. So then fine, we'll pay prevailing wages, we'll meet all these other requirements, then this becomes ministerial. In other words, it will never come to the planning commission, it will never go to the city council, staff will just approve it, done. And then you'll say, how come you approved that project? This is why. The CEQA does not apply to ministerial projects. You don't have to do an EIR. It's a ministerial project. Only design review, only applying objective standards. And then here's the list of things to be eligible. The general rule is that it would need to be 50% low, or possibly, depending on the city you're in, it might be 10% low. It contains at least 2 housing units. It's on a parcel zone for residential. It's not on one of these prohibited lots. Like, it's not in the coastal zone. It's not prime farmland. It's not wetlands. It's not in unmitigated higher fire hazard severity zone. It's not on an earthquake fault. You know, if there's something really crazy about that particular site and the building's going to fall down the moment you build it, then it's not allowed. But otherwise, if it's not one of those things, then they might be able to meet the requiremms.
On a quick question on that, if that were, I mean, I know these are examples, if that were to happen, is the city the ones who enforces that, let's say the prevailing wage, do they have to make sure that they're reporting? Because usually on prevailing wage, you got to report it at the end of every week.
Right, I'm not sure of the reporting requirements on SB 35, but typically, number one is the developer is the one that is required to do it. Mm-hmm. So they would pay prevailing wages. Yeah. And let me tell you, their employees know that they're supposed to be getting paid prevailing wages, and they will sue if they don't get paid the full amount. Yeah,
but I've seen a lot of
you could see
people trying to kind of skate that law.
Right. And some cities, and I don't know if it's mandated for SB 35, some, I just don't recall offhand, there are a lot of these statutes that actually mandate that they provide city with receipts, et cetera, proof that we paid prevailing wages. I don't remember offhand, but thankfully we don't have to deal with that at the moment.
Yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm. And then there's other requirements to qualify for SB 35, but again, the main requirement is that they pay prevailing wages. And then if they qualify, then they get streamlined approval. They would notify the tribes, they would submit a building permit application, they'd prove their eligibility, CEQA would not apply. The city would have 60 days to determine compliance, and if it's a large project, 151 or more units, the city only has 90 days. This is why it's a streamlined process. That's a very short turnaround. Sorry, staff, that's gonna be a lot of work if you get one of those projects. Yeah. Design review, maximum 90 days, unless it's a large project, in which case it's 180 days. Also, density bonus rules apply, so all those other things can also potentially kick in. Government Code 66300. In general, a city cannot enact a development policy, standard, or condition that would have any of the following effects. Essentially, we can't reduce the ability to develop a particular parcel. Okay? If we do that, we'd be violating. Actions which would individually or cumulatively reduce the site's residential development capacity. What does that mean? Reducing height, density, floor area ratio, new open space or lot size requirements, increased setback requirements, minimum frontage requirements, maximum lot coverage limitations. So for example, if we've got a project that's coming before you, we should not be adding conditions of approval which say, and you promise that, yeah, that space that you still own that's not subject to any sort of habitat easement, it's no way special, we'll We'll let you build exactly according to area of the law, but you have to promise that you're never going to develop that other lot over there that's completely empty. Like that would be a reduction in the ability to provide housing in the future. So we just need to be careful about what sort of conditions of approval we would impose on projects. Just make sure that they're not violating any of these sorts of requirements.
Question on this.
Yes.
I know that we have a general plan developed for the city and certain area that you have to build according to the floor ratio, area ratio. And now here you said that we cannot, we must allow them regardless the height or the floor area ratio. Is that, I know that there are mixed use and there are some area that we have only like one ratio area, then they want to build 2 or 3. What can we do in that case?
Right. So that everybody's up to speed. So the floor area ratio is essentially a way of saying how much density of a building can you pack into a certain area. So for example, if everything is 1 story and you take up the entire lot, that's a ratio of 1.
Right.
Okay, but if you squish everything away from the middle, but then you go 2 stories, so if you take up half as much space and you build 2 stories, that's still a ratio of 1 because you've built just as much building. So if we are proposing to say, actually, the current floor area ratio is 0.5 is the maximum. If we were to say, no, actually, it's 0.25, you can build less now than you used to be able to build. If we change that floor area ratio and we said across the board, everybody can develop less housing, then that might end up violating this rule. Because we're essentially saying everybody now can develop half as much as you used to be able to build.
Like you said, our general plan is maybe 0.5 or 1 right now.
Right, so we can keep that for sure.
Yes, but we can keep that. But let's say that the developer came in and said that I want, because of this code, I want to build with the floor ratio of 2.
Oh, so we don't have, so this rule doesn't say we have to allow more floor area ratio. We're just saying we can't make it worse.
Okay.
Okay? We don't have to help you, we just can't hurt you.
Okay. All right.
So, and if we do reduce the floor area ratios here, then we should probably increase them somewhere else so that you end up with the same net amount of housing that could be built.
But is there limited for us to raise the floor area for a certain area?
So if you increase the floor area ratio,
Do we have to reduce
the permitted floor area, in other words, you can build more,
Yeah,
no problem.
by all means, you can.
The state will always say, great, build more housing.
If you reduce, then you have to make it more at somewhere else. But if you do more, you don't have to reduce anywhere else.
Correct.
Okay.
So other examples of things that we could not do or should not do would be housing a moratorium saying, from now on, no more housing in the city. We cannot use standards other than objective standards. We can't say, well, we'll only allow housing if it complies with the community atmosphere. Well, we don't know what the community atmosphere is. You're just making that up, right? Well, we'll know it when we see it. We know what fits in the community character. Well, if we have those rules, then we can't apply those rules for certain types of housing projects. So we can't put caps on the amount of construction. That said, things that we can do. We can prohibit short-term occupancies. We can say, hey, look, this is not for short-term rentals. This is only for people living here long-term. CEQA still applies, and then we can't downzone unless we upzone somewhere else. So we've talked about that one a bit. Okay. Another thing to be aware of is AB 2097, projects near mass transit. This code section, here's the rule. In general, a city cannot require automobile parking on any, quote, residential, commercial, or other development project within half a mile of high-quality public transit. So if it's within half a mile of a train station or a bus station, where like 2 lines, the intersection of, say, Westminster Boulevard and name another major transit corridor, Beach, okay, then that might be an example. Assuming both of them qualify, then if you're within half a mile of that intersection, then this might apply to you. I don't know the facts, we'd have to look into whether that applies, I'm just guessing, I'm just naming places.
When you define no parking, is this for, what do you mean by no parking?
So if they build 5 new homes right across the street from a train station,
Right.
we cannot require that those homes have any parking spaces. Now, the developer has the option to build parking spaces because they know, shoot, I'll never be able to sell my project if I can't have somebody park here. But we as the city can't force them to make that decision.
Yeah, I've seen projects where less parking was required, but the developer says, but we're going to go ahead and build this many because they know they need that many in order to sell the project.
Correct. That's been my experience. I cannot think, I'm sure that I've seen a project, but I can't think of any projects of any significant size where they didn't provide at least some parking.
Okay, I know that you are going to the ADUs and.
Yes, so there are 2 exceptions. The general rule is we can't require parking. There are 2 exceptions. One exception is if the city makes a finding within 30 days of a complete application saying that this would have a, quote, substantially negative impact on one of the following, either the ability to meet RENA. In other words, if they do this without parking, then we're not going to be able to meet our housing needs requirements. I don't know how you would make that finding. This will impact the ability to provide senior or disabled housing. In other words, we need the parking so that old people can live here, right? Because they need parking for an ambulance or parking for whatever. Or if it's on existing residential or commercial parking, there's an exception to that. Doesn't apply for certain affordable projects or housing less than 20 units, of certain exceptions, blah, blah, blah. Essentially, staff will figure this out. That's what you need to know there. Also, accessory dwelling units. Now, the city does have an ordinance, and the city does have the ability to regulate somewhat relating to accessory dwelling units, but the great majority of this is controlled by state law. These projects will not come to you as the city council, but what is in your purview is you could decide to change the ordinance. So individual projects won't come to you, but you can decide how all the rules might change. So accessory dwelling units, ADUs, essentially, cities have express authority to regulate based on a number of things. We can regulate park, height, setback, landscape, all these things, but we cannot include a minimum lot size requirement anymore. But then we say that we can control these things, but then the state has kind of said we can't because they tell us exactly what we have to approve and what we can. So there's 2 basic rules, what I call overrides. There's 2 for single family zoning. There's 2 for, I shouldn't say zoning. There's 2 for single family units, and then there's 2 for multifamily. So if you have an existing single family unit, then state law says no matter what the city wants to do, the city has to approve this. This is why I'm calling it an override. It allows 1 accessory dwelling unit in an existing structure in a residential or mixed-use zone. Additionally, they can get 1 junior accessory dwelling unit. So in other words, if you have a single family home, you can get 1 ADU and 1 junior ADU. Also, an alternative is the city must allow an ADU that does not exceed 16 feet. It could be 18 feet, it could be 25 feet, but as a general rule, we'll call it 16 for simplicity. If you, in the backyard, doesn't have to be the backyard, but 16 feet meets 4-foot side and rear setbacks and does not exceed 800 square feet. No matter what, the city must allow that.
When you say lot coverage is not, so what size of the lot that allow us to do this? Does it matter?
It does not matter.
It's as long as single unit, now you can build the ADU.
Correct.
Doesn't matter what.
So if our standard lot size, minimum lot size is 5,000, and they have a 2,000 square foot home on it, shoot, I'm gonna make it crazy. They have a 3,000 square foot lot, they have a 2,000
Square foot, yeah.
They can build an ADU of 800 square feet and they'll have 200 square feet left over.
What about the law that or ordinance that we have in the city that there is certain number of percentage of the front yard need to be so-and-so? Is it still apply?
The front yard setback requirement still applies. The state mandates us to apply 4 feet side and rear yard setbacks.
Okay.
So they do have to, so our code says that they have to meet our front yard setback requirements. So you basically, yeah, I'll just leave it at that.
Okay.
So
What's a minimum size ADU in the back or JADU?
minimum is state law, so state law requirements, unless we've reduced it. So state law says that it must be, so you need to meet the building standards, which is 220 square feet. It's very small. Half the size of a garage is 220 square feet. Now, the city has the option to reduce that even more if it wants to. It can reduce it to as little as 150 square feet. Most cities do not. And I do not believe that you did that. Okay.
Thanks.
So, single-family zone, you
Question.
get one ADU and one JADU, yes.
Okay, quick question. ADUs has to be in the back, can't be in the front, right? Can they?
They have to be in the backyard, not in the front yard, is what we're just saying.
No.
They can also be in the
No, no,
front
no.
yard, provided
I
that the front yard
disagree.
setback is met.
Ah, well, okay, sorry.
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry, that's exactly what I meant. Okay, my apologies. ADUs, so in a multifamily, so notice I'm not talking about what the zoning is. I'm saying what is on the lot. So if the zoning is mixed use, if the zoning allows residential, then the question is, what is the building that is on that lot? It is not what is the zoning. You follow? So if there is a multifamily dwelling on the lot, or there will be one, then they get two choices. The overrides are one as follows. You could internal ADUs. That means you're allowed to take an existing apartment dwelling. Let's say we've got an existing apartment building of 20 units. You're allowed to say, okay, 20 units, 25% of 20 units is 4. Did I do my math right? 4. So we can get up to 4 ADUs inside that existing multifamily dwelling structure. So, but that needs to be converted from non-habitable space. So that's the boiler room, that's hallways, that's, entryways. The reality is, at most, you're going to get 1, 2. I mean, they built these things efficiently, so you're not going to get a lot of conversion in that regard. Far more often is that people will, or it could be potentially attached parking garages, so that might be a possibility if it's part of the same structure. Far more often is that people will request to build 2 new ADUs, up to 2 new ADUs that meet side and rear setbacks. It's the 800 square feet requirement, 16 feet in height, could be 25 feet if there's an existing multifamily dwelling structure of 2 stories. And it needs to meet side and rear setbacks of 4 feet. So generally, these are the requirements. There are reduced parking requirements for ADUs. There's a maximum of 1 parking space, but if there's a certain ADU size, if the ADU is either a garage conversion or a half a mile from public transit or a studio, then there will not be parking requirements. 9 times out of 10, there's not going to be required parking for an ADU. Impact fees, they still have to pay impact fees, although they may be reduced depending on the size of the unit. Some cities don't require any impact fees. I don't know offhand what we decided to do.
We require school fees and park fees.
Is there the park fee, is it tied to a square footage, that minimum square footage?
Yes.
That would be over 750, correct?
That is correct.
Thank you.
So if you're building an accessory dwelling unit, then at most they can be 500 square feet, and then ADUs, there's different size requirements. But I don't want to get too much into the details. You've got an ordinance that spells this out unless there's specific questions.
Let's say that you have a big lot, and how many ADUs are allowed to build in a lot?
If it's a single family structure, then at most you can get 1 accessory dwelling unit and 1 junior
Junior,
accessory.
right?
And the junior accessory dwelling unit needs to be part of the primary structure. So
And that's the
what I
maximum.
think of this is grandma decides to move into the house, but you put a wall up between grandma and the rest of the house. So it's part of the house. That's the junior accessory dwelling unit. as opposed to an accessory dwelling unit, which has to have all of its own facilities. A junior accessory dwelling can legally share a bathroom. Because it's grandma, right? That's my thinking anyway.
Well, most of the
Nothing
time
in
it's
state
not
law
grandma.
says it must be grandma. That's just my
That you
example.
have a 10,000 lot and you want to build 2 ADUs, you can't do that, right?
Correct. Now, obviously, a city can always change its laws to allow more development if you so choose, but that's the minimum of what state law requires.
What about SB 9?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Let's get to that, Christian. That is
It's
a
actually in
very
the
good
slide,
question.
but
So
yeah,
let's
that could
do it.
affect what you just asked.
You know what? So I will get to that. So let me not forget. There may be more development potential. In
That's
that
all right.
example, potentially you might be able to get a total of 4 units where you have 1.
Right.
there. So
First, I just want to ask, have we adopted an ordinance, city ordinance for SB 9 yet? I don't think so.
Yes, we do.
We do? I don't think so.
Okay, let me verify that.
Okay, thanks.
So as far as ADUs, here are different things that different cities do. This is where we do have discretion. We could allow, some cities allow new construction to be 2 stories, reducing the minimum size of bedrooms from 220 square feet to 150 square feet, not imposing limits on the number of bedrooms already. I believe that's what we already have. We don't have a minimum bedroom requirement. Some cities allow JADUs in attached garages, reducing development impact fees, and it sounds like we've already done that, that we don't charge development impact fees for JADUs. Some cities will offer credits for affordability covenants, but I think that's not a typical thing. AB 1033 allows cities to allow ADUs to be separately conveyed. In other words, we can tell people, you want to build an ADU? You're allowed to sell your ADU to somebody else, even though you can keep owning your primary building. So if the city wants to do that, you have the right. You're not required to allow that. Okay, SB 9. So this is how we can get to 4 units on that lot.
And I
Yes.
just want to ask you about, you said that you can build as many bedrooms. So are we still requiring that there has to be a window in each bedroom? I just want to make sure that.
Yes, so that's state law,
That hasn't-
actually.
we
So
haven't done-
the building code requires that for something to be a bedroom, you need to have a window and 2 ways to get out of the room, essentially.
That still stands, right? We haven't
Yes,
done away with that.
that's state
Okay,
law.
thank you.
Closet is requirement, or no?
A closet is not its own room.
Because I know that when you sell the house, if you without the closet, then the loan or the company, they assume that there's not a room,
A bedroom.
a bedroom.
I think by definition, to be a bedroom, correct me if I'm wrong, but to be a bedroom, I think that you have to have a closet,
Right.
which I
Correct.
like to fight that,
It
because,
is,
a lot of times that's a wasted space.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm not
It
sure
is.
it's legally required.
But that's what's considered
I
a
think
bedroom
maybe
is a
practically it
closet.
might be
Yeah.
required.
Right.
Go on, thank you.
All right, very good. So SB 9, this is how we can potentially get more, if you have a very large lot, you could get more single-family units on that single lot. So SB 9 requires ministerial approval. Again, this means that it won't come to the city council, it won't come to the planning commission. The city staff must approve a project if they check all the boxes. So it's required for a 2-lot subdivision or development projects for 2 units per lot. So this is different things. So if you have a really big lot, you could choose to split it down the middle and now you have 2 lots, or you could say, no, I'm going to keep it as 1 lot, but I'm just going to build a whole bunch on 1 lot. So either way you do it, the most number of units you could get is 4, regardless of whether you split the line down the middle, okay?
But if you don't split, you can sell, right?
If you split it, you can sell it.
But you don't, if you don't, like you said that you want to build as many, 4 units, and you don't need to split per SB 9, then you can sell individual unit after you build.
If the city does not allow the separate sale of ADUs, then you could not, then the only way that you could sell it would be all of the units on the lot would all get sold at the same time. just like.
Right. But if you applied SB 9 to divide it into 2 lots,
Then you could sell
then you can sell,
the half.
the
You
half.
could sell half or 2 halves.
right?
Yes.
Now, another question is that SB 9 requires approval of 2-lot subdivision. How big is the lot that you can divide it?
Right, so SB 9 does have a number of requirements, so here are the highlights. Number 1 is it needs to be in a single-family residential zone, and it needs to be not historic, landmark, or a sensitive area. There are anti-displacement requirements, so if it's rent-controlled, Ellis Act, tenant-occupied housing. Okay, you can't kick out tenants, is basically what this comes down to. The subdivision requirements. So number 1 is the size of the lots that you split. At most, they need to be 40/60. So you can't have one lot have 10% of the square footage and the other lot be 90% of the square footage. They need to be roughly equal, at most 40/60. Each resultant lot needs to be at least 1,200 square feet. So that means you need to have at least 2,400 square feet to be able to have both be 1,200 square feet. I did that math in my head,
Really quick question.
yes.
Can
And
you
nobody's
divide it
impressed. I was
so-
impressed.
So you can divide it lengthwise or widthwise, any way you splice it? It's just as
Not
long as it-
quite anyway. You do need to meet other requirements, but as a general rule, as long as you meet the accessibility requirements, and that's the main limitation, unless the city has any additional requirements, or is that the main thing?
And health and safety requirement, the fire department needs to review the division, the site layout to make sure that it's it's safe for fire protection. And just to clarify, Commissioner Ho, the City Council did adopt the SB 9 ordinance in January of '22.
Okay. Thank you.
So the lot needs to be roughly 60/40, maybe 50/50. You cannot do repeated lot splits. You can't split it once and then split it again and split it again. You cannot act in concert to split adjacent lots. So, hey, neighbors, let's do games and then work together and we'll keep splitting. So this is intending to prevent, the theory is that this might help prevent absentee landlords from seeing opportunity in splitting. I'm not sure.
I know that we have a few minutes here, but then I was at the meeting last week in Burbank, and they were talking about the SB 9. The SB 9 is also advantages to the owner in term of tax saving. Is that correct? Property tax or something like that?
I don't know that SB 9 itself
apply? No.
has special requirements for taxation.
Okay.
I could see that there could, depending how you structure it, there may be some benefits, because if, for example, if you split the lot and then you sell the lot, well, now you'll have half the size of a lot. So
Right.
you're paying half as much taxes because you already sold the other lot. So you might be able to decrease the overall assessed value of your property.
Correct.
But, that's,
Okay. All right.
my guess is that's what they were
I
getting
guess
at.
that was the discussion, yes.
Okay.
Because they are going to sell the other one and then, we make money. Yep. Okay, thank you for clarification.
So when can a city deny an SB 9 project? Then it would be if we make a certain finding based on preponderance of the evidence that the project would have a specific adverse impact on public health and safety that can't be mitigated. In other words, this will almost never happen. So if the lot split is proposed, then they get 2 units, and then we already talked about this, or you could potentially get 4 units. So how can you get 4 units? Let's see. So this only is in residential zones, single-family zones, and we can only impose objective zoning standards, 4-foot setback requirements. Let's see. Oh, there's more information here. Oh, I didn't even talk about it. Okay. Self-advertisement. I wrote a giant paper presented to the League of California Cities on exactly this topic. If you want to bore yourself to death, you can go read that paper. I think it actually answers all these questions, but there are other information here. So what I do want to talk about is the example that we talked about earlier. How can you get 4 units on one single lot? This is how you would do it. You would build an SB 9 unit which essentially is, think of it as a new primary dwelling. So you have two single-family homes. They're not, it's technically, it's a SB9 unit, but just think of it that way. And then each one of those units, now, they each get their own ADU. So now you have 4 units on the lot, regardless of whether you split it.
What about, can they?
Oh, I
do-
should, correction. If it's on one lot, if you do not split, the 2 units would need to be attached to each other because now that is a multifamily dwelling structure. And a multifamily dwelling structure gets 2 units. But if they're on separate lots and they're not connected, then you could only get 1 ADU and 1 JADU
Each lot, each,
total. So you, at
Each
most,
lot.
no matter how you slice and dice it, at most you get is 4.
I thought that you said that each lot that we have 2 units.
Right, it'd be
And 2
the
unit,
primary
that's-
unit
and
and an
ADU.
ADU.
Okay, so it's not, it doesn't have to be the JADU, right?
So if you do not split the lot, then the only way to get 2 ADUs is if they're attached to each other, because that's a multifamily dwelling structure. But if they're separate, the only way to get 2 units would be if one is an ADU and one is a JADU. Because, remember, because each,
When you split the lot and.
if you don't split the lot,
Okay.
right? If they're separate from each other, right? Okay. Yeah. All right. So how are we doing on time? I just want to make sure we hit the highlights. We got
Still
about
have
20
another
minutes
10.
tops, so I'll try to be brief. This will be, so there are, I believe, I just have the last 2 things are AB 2011 and then SB 6. Am I correct? All right, well, I'll let you confirm. So AB 2011 is the Affordable Housing High Roads Jobs Act. Okay, that and SB 6 are, the legislation is very similar. So this became effective July 1st, 2023. I'm talking first about AB 2011. Okay, overview. Here's the basic idea. The city must approve by right certain high-density affordable housing projects of 5 or more units if either it's 100% affordable project, so they're building only affordable units, and it is in a zone that's commercial. So I'm saying commercial, I should be precise. If it's in a zone where one of the principally permitted uses is office, retail, or parking, and if they're building 100% affordable housing units, they're allowed to build it there, even though it's zoned commercial. Even though it's zoned to allow not housing, they can put housing there. The other way is if it's a mixed income housing project, so it meets certain affordability requirements, along a commercial corridor, and that's a defined term. Think Westminster Boulevard, okay? So if it's on Westminster Boulevard and they want to build housing there, they can do it if they meet certain requirements.
Can you go back? Quick question. When you say 100% affordable in office or retail, that means those office, they have to rent
Sorry.
or lease?
Yeah, so I wasn't clear. So the whole picture, the idea is if somebody wants to build housing in a zone that's commercial, the state says we have to allow that to occur. And when do we have to allow that? 2 instances. One is if when they build this housing project, 100% of the housing units will be affordable. They're going to build 10 affordable units, and all of them, everything in the project is affordable. Or let's say 2 of them are affordable, or whatever the other requirements are. So this is how can I build housing in a commercial zone, even though housing's not allowed in the zone? This is what this is about.
So this bill will allow them to build it there?
They can build housing in a commercial zone, even though we don't allow housing in that zone.
Okay.
The project will need to meet objectives, designer objective standards. It needs to meet, projects will need to meet all requirements. They're exempt from CEQA because it's ministerial. We have to approve it, so it's exempt from CEQA. But the developer has to pay prevailing wages. They have to meet labor standards. That's going to increase the price of the project by 25% roughly, okay? So that's the reason it's the High Roads Jobs Act, because you're taking the high road. You are paying your employees more, so in exchange for that, you get to build housing. So I said there's 2 kinds of projects. One kind of project, if it's 100% affordable. So if it's 100% affordable, then these are the only requirements you have to meet, and there's 5 different pages of them. I will summarize. It's zone commercial. It's in an urbanized area. And I should say, all of these requirements also apply to the other kinds of projects as well. The commercial corridor where it's not 100% affordable. So these are the easier requirements. It'll be all of these plus some other ones. So number one, it needs to be zoned commercial, where it's a principally permitted use is actually the technical term. So it's urbanized area, we're urbanized. The site is 75% surrounded by urban uses, which is pretty much everything in Westminster. There might be some lot here or there, which is not, but pretty much everything is urban here. It's not adjacent to a lot that is 1/3 or more of the square footage is dedicated to industrial use. So this includes previous industrial use or a general plan from 2021 or before designated as industrial. And then here's examples of industrial uses. So that'd be like warehousing or utilities, manufacturing. It's not on one of the prohibited sites. You may remember this list from before. This is the exact same list that applies. Essentially, it's not on one of these prohibited places. It's not farmland, it's not wetlands, it's not a flood area, et cetera. It's not zoned for mobile homes. Why? Because, well, mobile homes are already affordable. We don't want to put more housing where there's already affordable housing. It's not in a neighborhood plan which already existed in 2022. So if we have a specific plan and that specific plan existed prior, basically 2021 or before, and that plan allowed housing, well, then they're allowed to do housing. But if it said, no, this is only for a mall, you can only have a mall here, and there's no housing allowed in the mall, then that wouldn't apply. Now, I don't know when our specific plan was adopted for the mall. I think that was fairly recently, yeah. So they might be able to override. Okay, and then for vacant sites, it does not contain an unmitigatable impacts on tribal resources. It can't, I'll just skip that. Also, it needs to be high density. You can't just build one unit in the zone. It needs to be it needs to be built at a housing element density, typically 30 dwelling units per acre. Not within 500 feet of a freeway, not within 3,200 feet of oil or gas extraction. They need to do a phase 1, phase 2 environmental analysis, make sure that we're not building on something that's that used to be a toxic waste dump. And then there can be no net loss of housing in the city or on the site. So those are, if they meet all those requirements, the city has to approve the project. As I indicated, well, maybe they're not doing 100% affordable. Maybe they're going to do less affordable. Well, here are the numbers. 8% low and 5% extremely low, or 15% lower income, or meeting these other standards. So if they meet those requirements and it's on a commercial corridor, then they meet these other requirements, then they can also proceed. If it abuts a street that is between 70 and 150 feet, and we can find out exactly which ones those are, but those are your main boulevards in town. The lot has at least 50 feet of frontage on a commercial corridor. It's not on a giant lot. It's not on a lot of 20 acres or more. It doesn't have an affordability covenant, not subject to rent control, didn't previously have housing for a tenant there. No tenants lived there, and you're not going to be demolishing housing for tenants. The lot doesn't, it's not a historic site. It's not RV use. It's not for mobile home park. Okay, so if all those things meet.
Before you go on.
Yes.
Before you go on. You have only 5 more minutes for you. Okay, we have only 5 more minutes for you. But I want to ask staff, where are we going from here? This is just update for the council, or we have to come to the conclusion, or do we have another study session? I want to know where we are going to.
So this is really an update because we do anticipate that in the near future, we'll be having more projects that will be presented to the city council in which these very updated laws are pertinent.
Okay.
So, if there is an interest in the council, I know we're limited on time. If you would like us to continue this study session, maybe to the beginning of, for the next meeting, so that we can, continue with the slides, and if you have additional questions that you come up with between now and then, we can certainly do that.
I think it's worth to have another session.
Great,
a
okay.
Study session. So at this point here, you can go. You have 4 minutes now.
Okay,
to go.
4 minutes, then I will cut to the chase. All right, they want to build, and then they meet all those requirements. Here are the different requirements. They might have different density depending on the width of the street, the density in the zone, how big their project is. There's all these special rules. What can you do about it? Nothing except for these things, okay? All right, so here are 3 pages of things that you as a city council have the choice to do. You're always allowed to be more liberal. You can allow more housing than the minimums, always, okay? You have the right to require ground floor retail for the mixed income projects. If you want them to say, hey, you know what, fine, don't completely destroy our commercial corridor, keep at least 50% of the ground floor to be retail, you can have an ordinance that says that. For mixed income projects, you can choose to, again, be more liberal. You can decrease the required minimum setbacks. You can require EV parking spaces if you want to. You can require bike parking. You can require accessible parking spaces. You can pre-exempt parcels. You can say, ooh, shoot, there's that project over there. We don't want housing there no matter what. So you can say, well, we're going to protect that lot, but now that, if we say no housing here, that means we have to allow housing somewhere else. So then you say, well, we'll make it up somewhere else. So if there's something you want to protect, you can, but you need to make sure that you're allowing housing somewhere else. The ordinance can clarify certain questions in the law, for example, enforcement of labor requirements, technical things that only lawyers seem to care about because there's issues and you could help resolve those issues. You could increase, you could change, if there's something that's historic that's not currently protected and you need to protect it because it is historic, now would be the time. If there are vacant lots that are currently zoned commercial, then you could add these are things that you probably don't want to do, most of them. So those are the big things, big picture. So I'm going to talk very quickly about SB 6. It's also related. Essentially, it's the same law, except that it's much easier for developers to build. However, they also have to pay not only prevailing wages, but they have to essentially hire a union. They have to meet all these other requirements that unions are really good at meeting. It's very similar in all these different ways. And again, it's the same set of issues. The city can exempt certain parcels. If you're going to reduce the density of certain parcels, you would need to increase. So if there's some particular place and you say, ooh, we really don't want housing there, now is the time. The other thing to think about is, do we want to ensure that you have retail and at least 50% of the ground floor? If so, you can put that into your ordinance. And if you don't care, if those are the 2 big ticket items, then having an ordinance is far less important.
How do we, then if we were to protect that, like that example of retail, I mean, we're under the crunch to get something adopted sooner than somebody applying.
Correct.
Submits an application. To my knowledge, I know of very few times the developers have used this. So it may be something worthwhile to do. I don't think it is an absolute urgency. Now, that said, somebody could come in tomorrow and we don't know. They're watching you.
But I gave a recent presentation on this topic and I asked 40 different lawyers in the room. I said, how many of us here have ever processed an AB 2011 project? Nobody. And that was 40 different cities. So it's not that likely. I'm sure that there will be changes in the law. I expect that we will have more projects in the future, but right now it's not a huge emergency. But what we certainly could do, if you wanted to direct staff to come back with an ordinance, and that would be something that could be done.
Yeah, we need to.
We'll be looking into that.
Yeah.
All right, you go ahead and wrap it up.
So that is it. And certainly I'm available afterwards. If there are things you want to talk about afterwards, I'd be more than happy to chat.
Okay, on behalf of the city staff and city council, we would like to thank you for your time, and it's a very informative section for us. We probably have another section to update of what's going on later on. So at this time here, I would like to adjourn the meeting, and we'll come back for a closed session at 4:45. So we have 5 minutes break to run to John and Chan's room.
Oh, my goodness. You got it all, right? Yes, I memorized everything. I told you.
please come back here at 4:45 so that we can start the next session. Good afternoon. The time now is 4:46, and I would like to start the closed session and the meeting called to order. Madam Clerk, please do the roll call.
Mayor Nguyen,
I'm here.
Vice Mayor Ho,
I'm here.
Councilwoman Fan West,
Yes, I'm here.
Councilmember Bonzo,
Here.
Councilmember Nguyen.
Here.
Mayor, you have a quorum with all members present.
Thank you. And this time, I would like to open for oral communication for closed session. Is there anybody sign up for that, please?
Mayor, we have none.
Okay. So we are going to recess for closed session, but before we do that, can you, I believe that we have a working on item today, and also announce the item that we are going to discuss at the closed session.
Yes, Mayor, before you have that, there is one item to walk on. It's an item of potential litigation. It did arise after the agenda was posted, and we would ask that you would walk that item onto the agenda on a four-fifths vote.
Okay. Second. All right. Motion and second on the floor.
I have a motion made by Councilmember Monzo, a second made by Mayor Nguyen. That's to walk on the item for an item of potential litigation to the closed session agenda. I'll go ahead and call roll. Councilwoman Fan West,
Yes.
Councilmember Bonzo,
Yes.
Councilmember Nguyen,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Ho,
Yes.
and Mayor Nguyen.
Yes.
Motion carried 5-0.
Okay. So next is the item that we're going to discuss. Did we announce that?
So the City Council will recess to a closed session for the following purposes: conference with legal counsel pursuant to Government Code Section 54956.9D2, potential litigation, number of cases 3.
Okay, thank you. The City Council now recess for a closed session.
you.